Hello and welcome to Just Vintage Crochet. Today we're going to have a little lesson in antique stitch terminology, but not just the terms, the stitch behind the terms, as it's not the same for every pattern. It's not the same for every pattern author or writer. So let's just start with the very, very basics. First, I was able to find a book from 1846. This is the oldest book I've been able to find that actually gives the definitions behind the terminology. Anything older than this, it really doesn't, and it's very confusing. This book is going to be a lot of fun for us to work into, by the way, because this is going to be quite a challenge, as none of these patterns, I don't have the whole book printed out as it's over 120 pages. But these patterns have it says 12 illustrations. There's not a single illustration. So they must have left those illustrations out when they were scanning these. It's just the written patterns. But let's get into stitch terminology. This really is going to be a fun book. So 1846, they really teach you. Now, this is a UK book. They really teach you the definition behind the terms. And the majority of patterns written in the Victorian era were written in British terms. Forgive me for saying a lot. I don't have a script. I'm really just sort of speaking. Virtually all patterns were written in UK terminology. So, and some of those terms are still used today. But we're going to learn some new ones today. Now, in the same Victorian era in the United States pattern writers were really trying to find their own identity in definitions of stitch terms. So this is where things get muddy and confusing, and you really have to focus on, where did this pattern come from? Is this a UK pattern? Is this a US or Canadian written pattern? Because oftentimes they'll use the same term and mean the same definition. At the same time, they'll use the same term with a completely different stitch definition. And also, they will just invent whole new terms for the same stitches. So let's get into this 1846 one, as this is our oldest reference to these stitch terms. Okay, I shouldn't have stacked those. So here we have knitting, crochet, and netting. Now, netting, that's going to be what we know as today as like a filet crochet. 1846, here is all the publishing, but it's no longer copywritten. It no longer holds a copyright. Terms used in crochet. The one consistent I have found, no matter how old the pattern is, the chain. The chain stitch never changes. So this just teaches you how to make a chain and all of that. Miss a stitch. Now again, this is a UK book, so miss a stitch means skip a stitch. Even in today's modern UK patterns, you will still find miss a stitch to meaning skip a stitch or skip a chain. Okay, we know what increase means, correct? We know what decrease means, yes. In crochet, that is worked square. Now, what a square crochet stitch is, it is a filet crochet. So you will have like a chain, and 1, 2, 3, you're going to skip 4, and in the 5th stitch down, you're going to start. This starts your square stitch. That counts as your double crochet plus chain 1. Then you will chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and in the next stitch over, work another double crochet. Or some patterns will call for you to chain 2 and skip 2. Chain 2, skip 2, and work a double crochet. So this is what a square crochet stitch is. You're just making like a little bracket. Okay. In the chain, put the needle through the loop, so this is working in the chain instead of working around the chain. See? Instead of. So moving on. Here we get into some of the stitches. A shepherd or single crochet stitch. This stitch is usually worked round for cuffs, muffetees, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm certain, boots, and etc. Make a chain, join it. Keep the loop on the needle. First round, put the needle in the last chain stitch. Draw the wool through. There will now be 2 loops on the needle. Draw the last loop through the first. In the second and following rounds, take first part of chain on the needle. So this is actually a slip stitch. Make a round, keeping one loop on the needle, as they say. Now we take up a loop, and we will have 2 loops on our hook and pull through the loop. There will now be 2 loops on the needle. Draw the last loop through the first. Once again, we go into the stitch. There are now 2 loops on the needle. Draw the last loop through the first. So single crochet is a slip stitch. It's also known as a shepherd stitch. Plain, double, or French crochet. Undo this work here. Okay, and it says to make a chain after commencing the row. Put the needle in a stitch of the chain. Okay, so we have our chain. Put the needle through a stitch of the chain. Draw the wool through. There will be 2 loops on the needle. Take the wool on the needle again and draw it through the 2 loops at the end. Cut the wool off. So at the end of your row, you will cut the wool off, draw it through, and begin at the other end. So they did not chain 1 and turn. So we draw the wool through. Now we have 2 loops on the needle. We wrap the yarn around the hook and draw it through both of the loops. This is a single crochet, but for them, this is a plain, double, or French crochet stitch. And when they worked their way all the way to the end, they cut, weaved in the ends, and started all over again at the very beginning. So when you're reading antique patterns, when they say a shepherd's stitch, when they say a plain crochet stitch, a double crochet stitch, or a French crochet stitch, they mean a modern single crochet stitch. Now we have the treble crochet. Make a chain after commencing the row. Put the wool around the needle. Put the needle in a stitch of the chain. Draw the wool through. There will be 3 loops on the needle. Take the wool on the needle again and draw it through 2 of the loops. Take up the wool again and draw it through 2 of the loops. This is 1 stitch. This is a double crochet. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start in the 4th stitch down. We now have 3 loops on our hook. We take the wool and draw through 2. We take the wool and draw through 2. So this is the same in modern UK terminology still to this day. They call a double crochet a treble crochet. And I didn't print off the rest of this. This is just teaching how to work crochet in 2 colors. We're going to get into this whole book in a later video. I really just wanted to touch on the very basics. Now, this was the very oldest teaching pattern that I could find, not teaching pattern, but teaching book I could find that actually gave the stitch terminology and the definition. And here you can see a sample of one of the patterns we will be working. None of these come with pictures. Look at this. Somebody wrote a correction on there. Oh, that is so interesting. I wonder when somebody wrote that correction. But yes, so this is a sample of a pattern from this I already forgot. I talked so much. 1846 book. So this is going to be an exciting book to work out of. Very exciting. Now, here we have Columbia Yarns book, and I do have this full book, but I only printed off the pages that were relevant to this video. This book is from 1908, so now we are in the Edwardian era. These are very helpful, and I find them to be true to size. You have to picture it just a little smaller than the hook you're holding up to because these were a little bit more of a pamphlet size, but these really are quite helpful, these diagrams here, and they give you the bone and rubber crochet hooks and knitting steel, wood crochet hooks, and wood knitting pins or needles. They also let you see the sizing of the celluloid and amber. It's really quite interesting. This book will actually show you and describe to you what these antique stitches are. Now, in 1908, that is antique, but a lot of them are used in vintage patterns, like from the 1930s, 40s, 50s. So here we have a chain stitch. Again, that always remains a constant. The slip stitch is now what we know as today of a slip stitch. That is a true and modern slip stitch. But from the other book we were just looking at, this is a single crochet or a shepherd stitch. The single crochet is correct to current single crochets. Double crochet is accurate and correct. Now here is why I wanted to show this book. The long stitch. This has had so many different meanings throughout the era. Number one, it wasn't even referenced in the 1846 book, but as you get more into the mid-century of the 1800s, you will find a long stitch. And the long stitch can mean so many different things. It can mean a half double crochet. It can mean a double crochet, or this stitch here that I'm going to show you how to make. But let's look at these samples here. This is from 1857. Here we are working. Now, this is an American written pattern, but here is a perfect example of using a UK term, but with an American definition. So here they are talking about work 3 long, 1 chain, and 3 long in every 7th loop. Now, UK terminology in the Victorian era, a long was a half double crochet. But here you can see, thank goodness we do have a picture that they want you to make double crochets. So they're using long as a double crochet. In fact, I have not found an American pattern yet from the mid-century of the 1800s and later on that used the term long, that it didn't mean a double crochet. Here we have from 1857, again, these both came from the same Peterson's book. And we are using the term long. This is a doily, and we are working with double crochets. Here we are also using the term long. Now, this pattern here is from the 1860s. This is from a Godey's. Thank you for helping me pronounce it correctly, by the way, to those of you out there. Godey's, I hope I'm still pronouncing it correctly, ladies' book. And so this is a little earlier than these patterns here. And they are still using the term long, but we can clearly see that they are using double crochets. Very fine thread, but these are in fact double crochets. These are not half doubles. Now, these may be half doubles right here, but I read through the pattern. They're actually calling for single crochets. It's not a half double, so I shouldn't have said that. But these are all double crochets. We look at this one here. They are using the term double crochet in this pattern from 1849. And when they say double crochet here, they are 100% referencing a single crochet. I don't know if, I do believe this is an American written pattern. This does come from either a Peterson's or a Godey's ladies books. It's one of the two. But the pattern writer could have just been writing this in all UK terms. And so when I looked through this pattern, yes, the double crochet is single crochet in this pattern. It's very interesting. Now, as we get into the Edwardian era, so the turn of the century, a long crochet has changed its definition again. This is still American terminology. This is a stitch that we really don't even use anymore. So what they want you to do is yarn over. We're working this stitch here. We're going to pass the yarn around the hook. So yarn over, insert hook. So insert into the stitch. Draw the yarn through. Now we're going to pull through one loop, then pull through two, yarn over, pull through two. And this is a long. It's crazy because it looks exactly like a double crochet. It looks exactly like a double crochet. But this is actually what it is. And it's a little longer than a double crochet. If you look, here is a double crochet, and that one stitch we just made is actually popping out. So that's likely why in the Edwardian era they decided to call this stitch a long, because it is longer than a double crochet, but it is shorter than a treble crochet. I'll work that one more time. We yarn over, we go into the chain, we pull up a loop. We yarn over and we pull through, pardon the little hair, we yarn over and we pull through only one loop. Then we yarn over and we pull through two, yarn over and pull through two. It's almost a happy medium stitch. If you're not quite wanting to work a treble, let's work a treble. If you're not quite wanting to work a treble, you want something that's not as short as a double, but not as long as a treble. Well, you have this long stitch. We don't even use this stitch really anymore in common works. So isn't that interesting? And of course, they do teach you how to work the treble. And they also give you abbreviation definitions. If you ever come upon a vintage, more specifically an antique pattern from the Edwardian era and earlier, SG means single crochet. The reason they say SG is because there is an S and a G in the word single. So SG means single crochet. And I do have one pattern from 1871 that does use this. So there you go, long crochet, double crochet. So we are in this pattern book. You're going to love the patterns in this book too. This one's got some super cute baby stuff. So I really wanted to cover, now this doesn't cover all of the stitch terminologies and definitions from the Victorian era, the Edwardian era, the vintage era. So we're talking 30s, 40s, and 50s. It really doesn't. This just covers more or less some of the antique terms and some of the more confusing antique terms, as what is a slip stitch, what is a single crochet. And by the way, just to clarify, a slip stitch in the Victorian era also meant a slip stitch that we know of today. But that was more, some UK patterns use the term slip stitch. Very, very antique patterns. So we are still referencing the 1840s here. But as we move more in, single crochet wasn't really used at all. It was simply slip stitch, and then on to double crochet, which translates into single crochet. I feel like this whole thing has been confusing. I hope not. But yes, that just covers a little bit of some of the more confusing aspects of antique terminology. And also, Canadian pattern writers, you can find in the Alberta, Canada Library online some fantastic old books where they had their own version of the Petersons and Godey's books. And you will find a little bit of tweaking of the terminology there too, as the Canadian pattern writers were also trying to get a handle on their own identity in crochet terminology and the definition behind the terms. It doesn't really deviate too much from the UK terminology, but in some instances it does. For example, the word long. I came upon one Canadian pattern where the word long meant a double crochet. It did not mean a half double crochet. And most Canadian patterns really stuck to their guns in the Victorian era to the UK terminology. So I hope this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments what you think. And I'm still compiling all kinds of things for you guys to see. I'm constantly studying this stuff. When I'm not working, I am studying this stuff. I have so much of this. I've got, I mean, papers, patterns. This is a vintage Japanese pattern that we will be working on very, very soon, by the way. That's going to be exciting. Oh, I've got all kinds of stuff that I have just been studying. And yes, so, oh, remember her? So yes, let me know in the comments what you think. There will be other videos that will come out explaining more, because there is so much more to learn. This Japanese pattern is going to be super stinking cute. There is so much more to learn because there is different ways of working in the round. And then, of course, we haven't even touched on the Tunisian crochet. That is a whole nother animal, but it's going to be very fun. And I do have a pattern coming up. I'm working on it as we speak. And it works with Tunisian crochet. Here is the yarn that I'll be working with that, these two colors here. Now, this looks kind of mustardy, but in real life, it's a fawny brown, like a deer brown. It's so soft and pretty. This is going to be really cute. But yes, Tunisian crochet. So we'll get into some of that too. I'll make all kinds of videos trying to explain the best way I personally have been able to learn. Now, I'm not saying any of these things that I'm telling you are absolutely set in stone, because to be honest with you, the Victorian era and the beginning of the Edwardian era was the wild, wild west when it comes to crochet. There was nothing was set in stone except for the chain stitch. That was the only thing that was ever truly set in stone. Terms, definitions, they were bouncing off the walls. They were anybody's to pick and choose. And if you didn't have a picture with your pattern, good luck. Good luck trying to decipher what stitch is this. So there's a whole lot to cover. Okay, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that you were able to learn something from this, write some of these things down. I hope I didn't cover these things too fast. This is my first time actually doing a video like this, where I'm not simply crocheting, but just talking about these things. I did not do this scripted, which was probably a mistake, but I don't know how to read and talk at the same time. I just talk, you know, we're just hanging out. We're learning together. Okay, guys, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. I don't know if it's going to be this or the vintage Japanese pattern. It's going to be one of the two, whichever one strikes my fancy. If the yarn comes in for this vintage Japanese pattern, I'm not even waiting. We're jumping on that one first. Okay, guys, love you lots. See you in the next one. I look forward to telling you more about antique and vintage crochet.